Over the past few years, I painted my fair share of Titans. So how is it when I finally come and do a Titan for myself, it turns out to be such a massive disappointment? Now, I understand how a lot of people are going to be looking at this Warhound thinking, why in the world would this rando on the internet be disappointed with the paint job on this Titan? Well, hear me out as I tell you my tale of woe. The important thing to understand is what my hobby is. Anyone who knows me knows that I love competition painting. And yes, I do a bit of gaming, but for me, painting competitions are an opportunity for the painting community to come together and celebrate, dare I say, the best part of our hobby. Cue all the keyboard warriors incapable of taking a joke. You now have your crusade.
What we doing live? Echoes in eternity.
Joking aside though, it's no different to going to a competitive tournament or a narrative gaming event. We all have our vices. I just like stroking little men with animal hair. It's not weird, right? Anyway, coming back from Golden Demon 2022, I was on a massive high. I'd come away with a commended result for my Stormcast Eternals. I was so close to my first demon and I know I was in the running for that trophy. But I was ultimately beaten by these three amazing entries. I was genuinely happy with the result, especially as regardless of what anyone tells you, Golden Demon is a brutal competition. Coming away from that event had me on an absolute high and I was ready to make a start on my next piece, so time wouldn't be against me. And with those good intentions in place, naturally I came back from Golden Demon, and what actually happened was I spent the next few months starting and ultimately giving up on projects. The little demons in my head clearly had other plans, whispering my projects weren't good enough, that I wasn't good enough, and that I had no right to be among my friends at these events. And we're all human after all. So I'm sure a few of you watching this can relate to what I'm talking about. Moving swiftly on, it's now 2 months till Golden Demon. I ultimately decided far too late that I needed to sort my head out. And I've gone through this sort of stuff quite a lot in the past, and it's something that I struggle with personally. So my answer is always the same. I uninstalled all social media off of my phone and I withdrew from everything apart from my own community. Within a couple of weeks, I was back to my somewhat sane, odd self, let's say. And I decided what I wanted to really focus on as part of the next entry. And the main thing that I knew that I wanted to prove to myself that I could paint was freehand. So the Warhound was chosen, one, because I had done a lot of Titans in the past, but two, because it had a massive canvas for me to go mad to just paint. And I know what you're probably all thinking, what madman enters something like a Warhound Titan to Golden Demon? Well, I thought the same. And to be honest, a few of my mates did as well. But ridiculously, it actually went really well. With the exception of a few challenges, it went great. In fact, it was probably one of the easiest display pieces I've ever painted. And as I was progressing through this miniature, that fact started to really worry me. Now let's fast forward to a week before Golden Demon. All I had left to do was build the base and paint the metals. Some of you may have noticed I rarely paint with metallic paints. And that's just because I don't enjoy using metallic paints. So I nearly always paint with a non-metallic finish. Now that in itself is not a problem, but it did mean that I had to be incredibly careful and take my time, because I was going to be up against painters who were far more experienced when using metallic paints. I knew full well that I could not afford to have a single weak section to this model. And I wouldn't, to be fair, as long as I didn't do anything stupid. Right before any event, I always go over my work to make sure that there's nothing really simple and easy that I can correct. And actually, if you come back to your work after a week or two with a fresh set of eyes, generally you'll have new insight into what works and what doesn't, and you'll see things that you didn't while you were painting it. And what I found was overall, I was actually really happy, but funnily enough, the freehand was bothering me, which is a bit wild as it went really, really well and it looked great. And I worked out what it was. It's quite simple really. The finish across the armor panels wasn't consistent. Some areas of that freehand were a little bit more glossy or satin, while other areas of the freehand were a little bit more matte. And this is pretty normal when you're using different brands of paint, which I do. And it never really matters when you're doing army painting, because ultimately you're going to do a varnish to protect those models afterwards anyway. And that was the answer then, surely. quick matte varnish and it will solve the problem, right? Right? Wrong. This was the biggest mistake I've ever made on a model. And to be fair, I've been painting for over 20 years. I've made some mistakes, but none of them have cost me like this. Now I can imagine most of you are sitting there watching this going, well, clearly the varnish frosted over, because that's what varnish does. And that's what always ruins models. And we've all been there, and I should not be having that issue. Well, no, actually, it didn't. It worked perfectly. And that ultimately was the issue. It worked too well. All the metals that I had spent all that time on making shine and blending in those transitions, making it pop, making it look great, had lost all of it. They had lost all of the shine and they just looked dull. And frankly, it was absolutely brutal. Now, I could fix this. All I had to do was mask it up and re-varnish those metals. It would have been fine. The problem was I'd left it to the last minute. I just didn't have the time. The event was the next day and it was already late. So I had to make a decision. Do I just abandon it and not take it at all, or do I go and take it? And frankly, I figured it'd be a shame after all of that work not to take it along. So I took it along to Golden Demon, knowing full well that the only way this Warhound Titan was going to win me a trophy was ultimately if the competition was incredibly weak. Something which made me nervous anyway, because if it was a weak competition and I won a trophy, I knew I was going to wonder whether I really deserved it. And luckily that wasn't a problem, because I went to Golden Demon in Manchester and the quality was insane. The vehicle category was incredible. It was some of the most amazing pieces I've ever seen. And as soon as I saw that category, I knew there was no chance of it winning anything. So I was happy to get a pin. That was an acceptable result for me. And it actually took a lot of pressure off the weekend because I knew that I wasn't in the running, so I could just enjoy it with mates without feeling nervous or anxious at all. So the biggest question, I suppose, is if I hadn't have messed up the varnish, would it have won? The truth is I don't know. And I'm not arrogant enough to sit here and say that I deserved a trophy or that I would have deserved a trophy. But what I will say is that Titan would have been competitive at the event. And that is all I ever aim for at painting competitions. That I've created something that I'm really happy with. I go to these events and it gets enjoyed by everyone and I have a bit of a fighting chance. This is going to seem really negative and I know a lot of people are probably not going to be happy about it, but from a professional standpoint, this Titan is the most disappointing model I've ever painted. It cost me more money than any other model in the last 5 years. It did worse than any other competition piece of mine in the last 5 years. And to top it all off, it flopped on social media as well and got very little attention. And I know some people are going to be thinking, it's not about the accolades. It's not about the wins. It's not about the likes. But the reality is I do paint for a living and this stuff is important. Now, if we forget about the professional side of it and we think about the hobby factor of this model itself, I loved every minute of building and painting this model. I love having it sat next to me, and all the issues aside, I absolutely loved the paint job on it. I enjoyed the absolute monstrosity of a build for that Warhound Titan because they are old kits now. I remember all the stresses that came from trying to get that resin clean enough for the paint to stick to it. I remember the sheer amount of milliput it took to fill the gaps on the underside of the torso. I remember the amount of time that I spent drilling the carapace just so it would fit together. It was an amazing kit and I loved every minute of it. So I don't want everyone to think that this video is just about me moaning about a kit, because it's an incredible model and I absolutely love the finish on it and it was so much fun. But I always get told people don't talk about their failures, their mistakes when they're showing off this stuff. So I thought, you know what, it will be an interesting video at least. Now I wish I could say that's where the video ends. I wish I could say the only issue that I had was the varnish. Not quite. 5 or 6 months on, this Titan still sits next to me. One day I might use it in a game alongside my Scythes of the Emperor. That varnished finish is still bothering me. So I just decided, hey, let's get it off the shelf, give it a bit of a satin varnish, see if we can make it pop a little bit and recover those metals. And the improvement was great. The armor panels are a little bit too shiny for my liking, but for a gaming piece, not a problem at all. And the metals have some pop to them again. And this is where we come to the conclusion of this sorry tale. After all this, after finally fixing what had bothered me about this Warhound Titan, the Warhound might have taken a bit of a tumble. Old fat hands here dropped it on the base. Interestingly, the brass rods that I put through the legs and the JB weld that were holding those legs together did their job really well, and they didn't break. Instead, the resin of the legs actually snapped, and the brass rods came out of the side of the legs. So my build held, the Forge World resin didn't. I'm sure there's a Cadia Stands joke in there somewhere. Now on the upside, I can absolutely fix this. It's gonna need to be glued together again. I'm gonna have to fill and sand down where the resin has been damaged and repair the paintwork. But I do not have the motivation for that right now. So for now, this Titan is gonna stay in bits on my shelf next to me until I get some kind of drive to fix it. So I think a fair question would be, what have we learned from the idiot on screen right now? Firstly, don't matte varnish your metallics. They look crap. Secondly, don't leave things to the last minute. It's going to come back and bite you. And lastly, if you ever meet me, don't let this guy near your Titans, because it'll end badly.